Good afternoon. It's good to be back and to be your speaker this afternoon. Good to see everyone that could make it back out. As you can see on the board, we're going to be continuing our study through the Song of Solomon. We're going to be covering all of chapter 3 this afternoon. And to introduce our thoughts, I encourage you to turn, and we're going to read the first 5 verses there to talk about our first section. What you'll notice as we're going through this chapter is it's very short, but there are 2 very distinct sections about it. There are 2 kind of separate stories going on that don't seem to go together at all, and we're gonna talk about why they do go together and what the message is overall for that. Let me turn this on. So starting at verse 1, the Shulamite is speaking here, and she says, "By night on my bed I sought the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. So I said, I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares, and I will seek the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. The watchmen who go about the city found me, and I said, have you seen the one I love? And scarcely had I passed by them when I found the one I love. So I held him, and I would not let him go, until I had brought him to the house of my mother and into the chamber of her who conceived me." And verse 5, "I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the does of the field, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases." So here we have another story of the Shulamite. All of this is her speaking and her story, and we're kind of dropped into it without a lot of context or setting of what's going on again. But there are 2 very important things that are happening that kind of drive the whole section and the whole message. Number 1 is that the Shulamite's beloved is missing. This is the main conflict that's going on, and that starts the whole story. We're not told why he's not there or where he is, but one thing that's I think is important to say is that there's no hint that he's being unfaithful or he's doing anything that he shouldn't be doing. That's probably the first place that our mind jumps to when we think about him not being there and her looking for him. But there's no hint of that from the text. So he could be delayed, he could be away on business, or any other reasons that we could think of, but we're simply not told. And one commentator I read, he said, we're not told why he's gone, and it's really not important. We don't really need to know. What matters is that he's missing. And what matters also is her response to it. Number 2, we see that she's going to do something about it. She's going to go and do whatever she has to do to find him. That's the story that's going on. So now I want to go through these verses, these first 5 verses a little bit more, and explain further what's happening and some of the imagery that's being used here again. So verse 1, she said, "By night on my bed I sought the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him." That just means she's looking for him, and he's not there. And we have 2 options here of what this can mean. This can either be a dream or a nightmare that she's having, and this isn't really happening, but she's imagining it. Or she is awake, and these things are actually happening to her. The general consensus, and what I'm going to go off for this section, is that this is actually happening. These are real events. And that's mostly because later in the song, in chapter 5, we have another dream-like sequence. And she says, "I sleep, but my heart is awake" there. And that sounds a lot more like a dream. And the general consensus is chapter 5 is a dream, chapter 3 is not. It's actually happening. And here she's experienced something that I'm sure a lot of us have experienced many times, and that's she's so worried, so stressed that she can't sleep. She's there tossing and turning and worrying and stressing about these things because her beloved is not home. She expected him to be there, and he's not. So verses 2 and 3, she says, "I will rise now and go about the city and the streets and the squares, and I will seek the one I love. I looked for him, but I did not find him. The watchmen who go about the city found me, and I asked them, have you seen the one I love?" So she makes a decision to take action. She's not just going to lay there and worry and stay up all night thinking about him. She's going to go out into the streets and look for him herself. And we get kind of a glimpse into her monologue. She's having to build herself up and get the courage to go do this, saying, I'm going to go do this because I need to. And I think these verses tell us why she has to do that, why she has to encourage herself, because she's going into very public and very dangerous places to do this. She's going into the city, into the streets and the squares, and she's found by watchmen. Just the fact that there are watchmen there tells us that this is dangerous. There are people there that are trying to protect her because she's going to a very dangerous place. And she's also putting herself in a very dangerous position socially. She's going around in the middle of the night looking for a man. She could very easily be mistaken for a prostitute or an immoral woman by doing this. So she's taking a very, very big risk to do this. But she does all of this because she's determined to find the one whom her soul loves. That's what the King James Version says very beautifully, I think, that she's willing to do any of this because her soul loves her beloved. Verse 4, she says, "Scarcely had I passed by the watchman when I found him. I found the one I love, and I held him, and I would not let him go." This is not a casual finding and saying, it's time to go home. She's grabbing hold of him, and she will physically drag him home if she has to. And her purpose in this, we learn in the next section of this verse, her purpose is to take him home and take him to their bed. This is very obviously talking about marriage and marital intimacy. We talked about how they're married at this point, and this is not something sinful that's going on. But we also have a phrase in verse 4 that I know was probably strange when we read over it just a minute ago. You probably noticed that she says, "I'm going to hold him and I'm not going to let him go until I brought him to the house of my mother and into the chamber of her who conceived me." And there's some important things that I want to point out about this to show us why this is here. And I know it's weird for us, but to show why it's not weird for them and the importance of it here. This is also going to come up again in chapter 8, so it's important for us to understand it now before we talk about it again in chapter 8. One other interpretation of this section that I wanted to mention, Dwayne Garrett argues that the mother's house, and especially the chamber of her who conceived me, is a metaphor for the Shulamite's womb. It's talking about fertility imagery. That's one interpretation, but I don't think that's what's happening here. And I think it takes away some of the important context of what's happening too that I want to talk about a little bit. So number one, I want to talk about the mother's house in the Bible. We have other examples of this being talked about because in ancient Israelite culture, the households essentially had two separate spheres of life. There was the father's house where public things happened like business and money decisions and legal things. And then there was the mother's house. This was the private side, the domestic side, and it especially related to marriage and family decisions. They weren't two separate houses, it was one household, but these were kind of different roles and different areas within the house. So that's kind of what she's talking about when she talks about her mother's house. The mother's house appears a few other times in the Old Testament as well. In Genesis chapter 24, when Rebekah meets Abraham's servant who's looking for a wife for Isaac, she goes and she runs and tells her mother's house about what's happened and about Isaac and this marriage proposal. In Ruth chapter 1, Naomi blesses Ruth and Ruth's sister and tells them each to return to her mother's house after their husbands die, after these are Naomi's sons. So they're to return to her mother's house to talk about this marriage and talk about their future plans because of the death of their husbands. And later in the Song of Solomon, chapter 8, like I mentioned, the Shulamite mentions that her mother's house was where she was instructed and where she learned about love and about marriage. So the mother's house was not a physical separate building, but it was where daughters and sons, and daughters especially, learned about love and marriage, and it was where it was decided what was going to happen in relationships and marriages. Number two, we also have another example of a situation like we read in chapter 3 of the Song of Solomon happening in another place in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 24 and verse 67, the Bible says, "Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her." And the language in this section implies that this includes everything in the marriage. It includes the consummation of the marriage as well. So I don't know if this was a universal pattern in Israel or not. I'm not implying that, but it's certainly not something that was weird or strange to happen between the Shulamite and her beloved. It was probably something common and honorable or understood, which is why it's mentioned here in the song. It was something that the audience would understand and not kind of look strange at like we do today. But what does it mean? What's the imagery and the importance of it? I think it shows us two very important things in context. Number one, again, it shows us that their relationship was not secret or shameful. We've talked about that. Aaron talked about that they're married at this point. And if they were not married, if this was inappropriate, the mother's house was probably the last place that they would go for this. So it shows us that they're approved and they're doing things right at this point. But most importantly, this is a symbol of the beautiful continuation of the Shulamite's family and of their families in general. Sean O'Donnell writes, he says, "They walk into the bedroom, her parents' old bedroom, yes, the chamber in which she was conceived years ago, which she sees as a beautiful thing. It's a continuation of a family romance and potentially the family tree." And I believe that's what we see in Genesis as well between Isaac and Rebekah. This is a beautiful thing symbolizing that their family is continuing, their family tree is continuing. The Bible tells us that Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, And it says that this comforted him after his mother's death. This was a beautiful and a comforting thing to him to think that through Rebekah, his family was continuing, and Sarah's family was continuing. And I don't know if the Shulamite's mother is alive or not, but I think that it's the same idea here, that this is a comfort to her and a beautiful thing that her family is continuing, and she's continuing that legacy by bringing her beloved to her mother's house. And even though we may not have the same traditions as them, that's certainly something that I think we can understand in our lives. We can understand the excitement of preparing to start our own families and hoping to follow the example of our parents and continue that family tree. I know many of us don't have that example of marriage to follow from our parents. I know that I can relate to that too, but we can be excited just like the Shulamite to start our own tradition, to start our own legacy of godly marriages and a good godly example to our children, so that someday my children want to follow my example or the example of grandpa and grandma and on down the line. And that's why I believe that this is here and why this is really a beautiful image of what marriage can be. Then verse 5, we again are told, the Shulamite says, "I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the does of the field, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases." We saw this back in chapter 2. TJ talked about this same charge. This is a very serious and a strong charge to the daughters of Jerusalem, who are the young unmarried women who are watching this relationship, and it's a charge to us as well, saying don't rush into this before the right time. The first 4 verses talk again about how beautiful marriage is, how beautiful intimacy and the continuation of family is. It's beautiful and joyful, but it's so beautiful and it's so joyful that it's worth waiting for the right time and for the right person. Don't start it too soon or you'll regret it. And now going into our second section, all of a sudden we're talking about Solomon. And it's a very abrupt change. There's no explanation why it changes. It's just verse 6, we're talking about Solomon. So if you will, we're going to read verses 6 through 11 now. Verse 6, it says, "Who is this coming out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the merchants' fragrant powders? Behold, it is Solomon's couch, with 60 valiant men around it of the valiant of Israel. They all hold swords, being expert in war. Every man has a sword on his thigh because of fear in the night. Of the wood of Lebanon, Solomon the king made himself a palanquin. He made its pillars of silver. He made its support of gold, its seat of purple, its interior paved with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. Go forth, O daughters of Zion, and see King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day of the gladness of his heart." So like I said, this is completely different from verses 1 through 5. We jump directly from a love scene basically with the Shulamite into this. And that's on purpose because verses 1 through 5 and verses 6 through 11 really are 2 separate poems. They're really not connected in any way, but they are connected. Verses 1 through 5 is all about the Shulamite. Verses 6 through 11 is all about Solomon, and they kind of play off of each other. I think that the New King James doesn't make that very clear. If you'll notice in your Bible, it probably says that the Shulamite is speaking all of chapter 3. But what's more likely, and what other translations do, is they attribute verses 6 through 11 to either the daughters of Jerusalem or just that this is just the writer saying this. It's basically a narrator through this section, and that shows that they're 2 separate things a little bit better. So I'd like to read from Sean O'Donnell's commentary here. He gave a very good explanation of Solomon's couch here and what's going on. I had 2 pictures of what it looked like, but I guess they didn't load. But if you'll imagine, it's basically a chair that's being carried by people on their shoulders. I'm sure you can imagine that from textbooks or other things that you've seen. And it's very ornate and very beautiful. Sean O'Donnell writes, "What is obvious is that Solomon is coming to town, and what is also obvious is that his coming is a big deal. There are 60 elite soldiers, which is nearly twice as many as King David had, and they are armed and able to protect even at night, marching beside this carriage. And this carriage smells good. It's perfumed with expensive imported goods from places like India and Arabia, and it looks good. It has a beautifully designed exterior and luxuriously inlaid interior, made of rare and costly cloths, metals, and lumber, made of the same materials as the royal palace and the tabernacle and the temple." And he compares it to a Rolls Royce mixed with the Ark of the Covenant. It's the peak of luxury and display and spectacle. And some other things that we learn from these verses is that this is most likely Solomon's wedding day. That's why this big display is going on. Verse 11 says he's wearing the crown his mother gave him on the day of his wedding, and it's pretty safe to assume that means that today is his wedding. And we're also told that everyone is called out to go and watch this. The daughters of Zion, which is the same as the daughters of Jerusalem, and everyone is called to come look and come see Solomon in all his glory. So what's the connection between these two? What's the point? The best explanation for this, and what I believe is correct, is that Solomon's wedding procession here is meant to serve as a foil to the Shulamite story. A foil is someone or something who is used to highlight another character by contrast, and usually it's highlighting them to make one person look better than the other, or one thing look better than the other. A good example of this we have in Scripture is the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee's pride and arrogance is supposed to make the tax collector's humility look even better when we compare the two side by side. And that's what's happening here as well. Solomon is a foil to the Shulamite. He's making the Shulamite and the beloved look even better by comparison. And one important thing about this section is that Solomon isn't actually a part of the overall story of the Shulamite. And what I mean by that is the Shulamite is not talking to Solomon here. Solomon is not a character that is interacting with them. This section isn't saying that Solomon is actually the beloved and that's who the beloved really is. What Solomon really is here is a symbol. Solomon is a symbol of wealth and power and all the wonderful things that you can find in the world. So we're kind of talking about the idea of Solomon, not Solomon, the real person, if that makes sense. And the song is using him to make a point through contrast, and that point, again, is that the Shulamite's love or relationship is greater than Solomon's. So now let's go through some of the contrast that the author uses to highlight this foil. Number one, the Shulamite is unprotected. She is alone and vulnerable as she's going through the streets looking for her beloved, and she's on a very dangerous mission to find him. Meanwhile, we're told Solomon has 60 armed elite soldiers guarding him, and we're specifically told that they can guard him even at night. I don't think that's a coincidence that the Shulamite is out at night all alone, and Solomon has 60 men who can guard him even at night. Number two, we see that the Shulamite has simple devotion to her love. The only thing she's doing, the only goal in her mind is to find the one that she loves. And when she does find him, she takes him to their marriage bed. She takes him to the most private place imaginable. But Solomon, his love and his wedding is a spectacle for everyone to see. He's displaying the finest luxuries of the world, and he's showing his love in the most public place possible. There's a difference between the private and the public here. And number three is the kingship that is shown. Solomon, as we know, is the literal king of Israel. He is the king of the land. But we're told that the beloved is not really a king. He's probably working class and pretty low on the totem pole. But like we talked about in chapter 1, the Shulamite calls him my king. He is king in her heart and by the honor and respect that she shows to him. So the question that we're supposed to ask by looking at this is, which love is greater? Which one is more genuine or more devoted? Which love honors God more? And I'm sure that we can tell the answer by now, but the song also answers this question for us a little bit later on in chapter 8. Without taking too much from whoever has chapter 8, in verses 11 through 12 of chapter 8, the Shulamite says, Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He let out the vineyard to keepers. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. But my vineyard, my very own, is before me. You, O Solomon, may have the 1,000, and the keepers of the fruit 200. And in these verses, what she's saying is she's talking directly to Solomon, and she's saying, you can keep the 1,000 pieces of silver, you can keep the vineyards, because my vineyard, my very own, my beloved, is better than all of that. It's better than Solomon. And chapter 3 is telling us the same thing in the exact same way, that her beloved is better than Solomon. And what really makes this even more meaningful and important is when we remember that Solomon is most likely the one writing this. This is the Song of Solomon. He's writing this and telling everyone, especially those who are young, don't pursue what I had. Don't pursue the show and the spectacle. Pursue what the Shulamite has, the simple devotion, the private love, because that is greater in every way than what I had. And that takes us to the end of chapter 3. To end, I want to quickly go through some of the takeaways that I took from this section that I hope can be beneficial to you as well. Number one, I think one thing that's very obvious from this is that love is active, or at least our love should be active. It's something that I know we probably all struggle with. I do too. But we should understand and know that love isn't about sitting around and hoping for things to get better. It's about actively working and to make them better. It's about seeking and pursuing each other, and that's exactly what we see from the Shulamite. She's laying in bed and worrying. She could have stayed there all night and tossed and turned worrying, but she gets up and she does something about it. She took risks and she put herself in a dangerous or compromising situation, but she put aside her pride and she put aside her fear to prove that her love was devoted to her beloved. So I know that I need to remind myself that when there's struggles or a problem in my relationship, it's on me first and foremost. I need to be active and prove my devotion and my love. I need to go and find her, not wait for her to come and find me, because that's the way it should be. Number two, I think we can see very clearly that devotion is greater than display. That's the main message of this chapter. And this goes along really with every aspect of our lives, not just our relationships and our marriages. Solomon had a grand display of his love, but the Shulamite had devotion in private, and that's what's more important. For us, it's not about what other people see. It's not what about our brothers and sisters see in our relationship. It's not about what Facebook or Instagram sees. It's about the devotion that your partner sees, and it's the devotion that God sees from you. There's nothing wrong with posting online. I like to do it from time to time too, but the question that I need to ask is what I'm showing the world and showing other people the same thing that Harley's seeing and the same thing that God is seeing from me. And number three, this is a message that we'll talk about again and again through this. We need to wait for the right time. Those who are young, the daughters of Jerusalem, all of us, we're told, don't stir up love until it pleases. And I really liked what Aaron said last time. It's not because intimacy is evil or because it's bad or sinful. Within marriage, it's because it's the exact opposite. It's good, and it's very good, and it's so good that it's worth waiting for the right time and the right person. There's no reason to rush it, and we'll regret it many, many times if we do. Those are my thoughts for this afternoon. I appreciate your kind attention and your patience as we went through this. If you have any comments or corrections, please let me know. We never want to close any service without offering the gospel invitation. If you're here this afternoon and you've not been baptized for the remission of your sins, there's no better day to do that than today. There's no reason to wait any longer. We would love to help you with that. We would love to celebrate that with you today. Or if you're here and you know that you've fallen away, you know that you've sinned in a public manner and you'd like the prayers of the church on your behalf, we'd love to help you with that as well. If we can help you in any way, we ask that you'll come while we stand and while we sing.
If you want to see more sermons like the one you just watched, then click on the subscribe button below and you'll be alerted when a new video is uploaded. Also, check out our website at chapelgrovechurch.com. At the top of the page, you'll find a resources button where you can take a free online Bible study series. One series is Are You Saved? It's a completely video series conducted by myself, Aaron Batty. The other one is written. It's called the Truth Free series. Upon completion of either one, you'll get a copy of a free book in the mail, Muscle and a Shovel. Thanks for watching our channel. We'll see you next time.